And it seems we're live again. So I am super excited again to welcome another set of speakers this time around. We saw Emily a little bit earlier today. Yeah, Emily was with us last year, but Ed was with us last year as well. So having them in tandem in this session is like a bonus part. So as you know, Ed is coming from Microsoft and Emily is coming from IBM. And today they will talk about the MicroProfile. So please go ahead and take it over.
Thank you, Tanya.
Thanks, Tanya. Happy to be here. Let's take it away.
Yes. Let's get started.
Okay, so thank you for joining us today. My name's Ed Burns, and I am very happy to be coming to JakartaOne Livestream 2020. For the past year and a half or so, I have been working on Java on Azure at Microsoft. Emily, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello. I'm Emily Jiang from IBM. I'm the Liberty Microservice Architect and also the Senior Lead for MicroProfile.
All right. So we know that you have, if you've been with us from the morning on, thank you for sticking with us on the stream. If you're coming to us in the middle of the day, then we are welcome and happy to have you. But we also know that there's a lot of other things you could be spending your time on right now, and so we're happy that you're spending your time with us. In the next 45 minutes, we would like to give you an introduction to the PiggyMetrics sample app. And the purpose of this session is to sort of share some lessons we've learned in porting the PiggyMetrics sample app to run on MicroProfile from its origins as an example in Spring Boot. So this is kind of a lessons learned, and we're going to go over both sides of the story here with some demos, and then we'll have a conclusion. So we hope to have a little time to take the questions. So please, if you'd like now to click on the Ask a Question button at the bottom to the side of the number of people on the stream, and you can put your questions on there, and I'm hoping that we will have someone to help us with curating those. And so let's go to the next slide. Now we're going to try to do this in a more fun fashion. We're going to do a bit of role play here. So in this role, I'm going to be acting as the corporate line of business app developer. What I have done is inherited a Spring Boot based line of business app, and that's this MicroProfile PiggyMetrics app. And what I need to do is to convert it over to MicroProfile, and the goal is to reduce operating expenses in terms of how much infrastructure we need to run, how much we have to pay to run it, and also maybe hopefully lessen the cognitive tax that we have to pay on understanding lots of different APIs from different sources and different vendors. So that's my role. Emily's role is the microservices expert and also the MicroProfile consultant. And so she will be sort of explaining to me as the line of business app developer, hey, here's what you need to do to move this thing over from one to the other.
Right. So Ed and I will work together to look at the Spring Boot based PiggyMetrics to see whether we can improve it or not. So just give you some background on the PiggyMetrics. So PiggyMetrics was initiated by Alexander Lakyankiv, if I got his name right. So it's a kind of demonstrating microservice architecture pattern. So this article, the microservice architecture pattern was published by James Lewis and Martin Fowler back in 2014. So basically it's kind of tell people what kind of microservice architecture should be like. So basically, like in essence, is a single application should consist of a few of like a small services is called microservices, and each of these services should have its own process and its own release cycle. And these services will be communicated over like a REST. And each service should have its own business like capability and can be deployed like independently, and also is kind of there shouldn't be much centralized management. And the other thing is this like microservices should be in like should be language agnostic. So basically, it can be developed using like different languages like Java, Go, and Python, etc. So in this PiggyMetrics, it has like three services, at least 3 services. Actually, it's 4 services, like account and also statistics and notification. And each services has like its own database. This is very important. Like each microservice should have its own database. So don't build like multiple microservices share like a single database. So that is called like distributed, like it's called like nightmare microservices. Eventually,
right.
you just shoot yourself in the feet. So if you want to check out more about PiggyMetrics, go to this GitHub repo to like find more. So this is another big architecture, including the like infrastructure. So basically, the client directly like expose the endpoint, and then is the front end. There's a API gateway. So the client directly talk to API gateway, and then API gateway talk to these 3 microservices. And as you can see, the microservice using ribbon histories, and also it uses like a config, auth, Oracle, and some other like a dashboard, and etc. So this is kind of the whole big architecture. So it's this is kind of the PiggyMetrics, and for you to like at first get it running first.
Right. So that's a great thing for you to show me. You know, as a consultant, I'm happy to see that. So what I'm going to do is show you where we're at and what I've inherited to run PiggyMetrics on Spring Boot. So let me just get that demo going. You know, let me bring that up, and we'll get that going. Okay. So what I have so far is it's a Maven package, you know, Maven-based application, and I'm going to run it and deploy it on the Azure Spring Cloud Service. Now this is working really great for us. It brings all of the ease of management and you know, maintaining the stuff on the server for me. I don't have to worry about any of the infrastructure. So I'm able to deploy this application to the Azure Spring Cloud. So I'm using the Azure CLI here, and I'm setting up the different defaults, and I'm creating the different microservice apps you showed me there. And then I'm deploying them. So I get the gateway fat jar, Spring Boot jar, and I'm able to quickly deploy that to the Azure Spring Cloud Service. So this is going to upload to the Azure portal. And so now I'm inside the Azure portal, and I can see the fully managed platform as a service. I've got my 3 different tiers or microservices running here, the gateway. Let's take a look at the gateway. You can see that it's starting to consume some resources now. And I'm going to set up an external domain so I can access this gateway front end. There it is, that nice Azure microservices.io. And there it is. This is what the PiggyMetrics app looks like. I'm going to go ahead and create an account and tips and tricks and set up my password and register. And, you know, I'm going to be able to go in and log in and start to put some data in here. So that's the very simple demo. You can see what we're doing. It's an account management software, personal finance tracking software, and I was able to deploy it pretty quickly up to Microsoft Azure. So let's go back, and maybe you can help me understand, Emily. How can I take this demo that runs really well and easily on Azure Spring Cloud Service, and move it over and take advantage of the MicroProfile and Jakarta E APIs. So after working with this a little bit, I did recognize that Spring Boot is true to its word. It's a way to boot yourself into Spring. And when I looked at the competitive landscape of all the different microservices technologies in Java, it really is the oldest one. I mean, I remember when Spring Boot was like a shoot off from Spring Roo. Spring Roo, most people don't remember that anymore, but it was a sort of thing that came around when Ruby on Rails was the hot stuff. And it really kind of predated the whole microservices thing. So the thing that I like about Spring Boot is that it gives you the entire Spring framework. But on the other hand, that's quite a big thing and kind of antithetical to the microservices way of each system being light. Now, yeah, it boots up fast, and that's all awesome, but the cognitive load is still there, where all of the APIs that are in Spring are a part of the mix. So it's not as modular as, say, maybe Open Liberty would be. But anyhow, it does work really well with Spring Cloud, and it follows the Spring development governance model. So that's a great thing. It's a single vendor, right? So you're just using the Spring APIs for the most part. You don't need to depend on any other Jakarta or JavaX APIs. But on the other hand, with only one supplier, there is no separation from interface and implementation. Spring is the implementation. Spring is the API. So we want something that's a little more flexible and has a little less vendor lock-in. So we've heard about multi-cloud. We want to be able to have our data estate be able to be portable across different clouds. But what you actually also like is having independence of the runtimes within those clouds as well. So it's multiple levels of independence here. So one vendor versus many vendors, Spring Boot versus MicroProfile. So why don't you tell me a little bit more about what I'm trying to understand here, Emily.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you for sharing that kind of the concerns and etc. So with that, I highly recommend to seek some alternatives. So the Spring Boot is awesome. However, there's another alternative. In the past, as you mentioned earlier, in the past, Spring Boot was the only one a cloud native programming model. Mm-hmm. Now with MicroProfile, we can have choices. So we should seriously look into a MicroProfile. The one your concern is about one vendor, and with MicroProfile, it's an open standard. There's many implementations for you to choose from. So you don't have the worry about vendor lock-in anymore, because you can freely move your microservice from one vendor to another one without changing your Java classes and etc. So let me give you some background introduction about this kind of comparison. Actually, last year I spent some time to take a closer look between MicroProfile and Spring Boot. I published article and under Eclipse newsletter. So I highly recommend you take a look and read about it. So in a nutshell, so I give you a quick run through about this comparison. So in MicroProfile, and we have a starter Spring, which is comparable to Spring start.spring.io. Start.microprofile.io give you a way to create your microservice. So it's the other thing is for creating microservice is very Martin Fowler earlier said is the most popular one is the REST calls. So in MicroProfile we have a JAX to do your REST call. In Spring you have a Spring MVC, and for the loosely coupled microservices you use a dependency injection. In MicroProfile, you have CDI. In Spring, you use Spring LOC or dependency injection. For documenting your microservices, in MicroProfile, we have an open API. In Spring, you have a Spring REST docs. And for connecting microservices, MicroProfile, we have MicroProfile REST client. In Spring, you have a Spring thin client and Spring MVC. And for defining your payload, JSON is a very popular payload format. So Spring in MicroProfile, we have a JSON-B and a JSON-P directly from Jakarta EE. In Spring, you have a Jackson or JSON-B. Spring also support JSON-B. For reactive, this is for the up to now is almost like parity for programming. And in the reactive, we also have comparable technologies. In MicroProfile, we have reactive streams operators. Also, you can use some other libraries like RxJava, and also we have reactive messaging. In Spring, you have a Spring Reactor, and you can directly use the Kafka API to interact with Kafka. And later on, for the handling hundreds of microservices, and you will need to do the configuration. In MicroProfile, you have a MicroProfile config. In Spring, you have a Spring Boot config, Cloud config. For building resilient microservices, in MicroProfile, you have fault tolerance. In Spring, you can directly use Netflix histories. For security, in MicroProfile, you can use Jakarta EE security together with MicroProfile JWT propagation. In Spring, you use Spring Security and Spring Cloud Security. And then for the kind of interact with cloud infrastructure, you use the health, like MicroProfile health, and also the metrics to add kind of more application metrics. And also for the distributed tracing, we have MicroProfile open tracing. In Spring, you have a Spring Boot actuator for the health and metrics. And for the distributed tracing, you use the Spring Cloud Sleuth.
Wow, this is a really great side-by-side comparison. It really does seem like everything I might need to do to port this application, there's an answer for it in MicroProfile. Can you take me through the code, and maybe I've shared with you the code in advance. Maybe you can look at some of the code I've had and show me how we can move from the Spring side to the MicroProfile side.
Yeah, great question. So I don't want to throw you into the deep end.
That's okay. I'm swimming fast.
I also look at the PiggyMetrics Spring Boot version. So basically, they have this kind of REST like a course, like a get and put. You can directly convert to use JAX-RS and use authentication, and you can use the Jakarta EE security and etc. The UI you can use MicroProfile Open API. So actually,
wait a second. That means it works with JSON Web Token right out of the box?
Yes, exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let me as I showed earlier, I also cloned that PiggyMetrics GitHub repo. So as I mentioned earlier, yes. So this is all the services and etc. You have account service, auth service, notification service, and statistics service. So you can see here this source file. So each service have its own a Docker file. So it will create a Docker image. So I mentioned earlier this thin client. So this is directly connected to do the client service architecture, and then you can declare this thin client, and then eventually you can inject this thin client. So it's kind of the similar pattern is used in all the microservices.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So let's go back to the slide. So after I have looked at the code, actually, I produced some initial porting for you to get started. So as you can see, I mentioned earlier, you use a thin client, so you can directly convert to use the MicroProfile REST client, like a register REST client directly correspond to that. So
so those beans are just CDI beans, right?
Yes. So these beans are CDI beans. So it's the other thing to add in Open Liberty, we have a guide. So to get you started, so each guide is take about half an hour. So let me, this is like a REST client. So I can directly show you, quickly show you this guide.
So these guides are designed to be easy for my team to take a look at, and they're able to put this and get on the ground running, right?
Yeah, exactly. If you want to learn Jakarta, you check out this guide. It has a code snippet, etc., and then you can get a clone into it. So
hey, by the way, are these guides going to be updated to use the new Jakarta namespace?
Yes, it's a great question. Yes, we try to keep this guide up to date. When we release a new MicroProfile update, a new MicroProfile spec, we also update this guide as well. Yeah.
Right.
So they are not. They are always recent. Okay, let's go back here. So as I can see, as I mentioned earlier, so you declare that as a registered REST client. So directly you want that interface. So this is directly the backend interface, and here you can directly do the injection. So you can in Spring you use auto-wired, in MicroProfile you use @inject REST client, and then you can call the backend directly from there. So for the configuration, and you can see here that some Spring annotation at configuration. So you use the config service, and also is a MicroProfile has the corresponding a technology called MicroProfile config. So you can directly use @inject @config property. You can define your property in any kind of config source, such as MicroProfile -config properties, or the system variables, or environmental system properties, or environmental variables, or any other config map, or the zookeeper, and etc. You can do anywhere. Again, in each slide, I put some guides, Open Liberty guides for you to help you if you want to learn.
That's great. Thanks.
Thank you. And for secure endpoint, so it's one service uses a secure endpoint enable resource service. Alternative is to use Jakarta EE, use security rules allowed to secure this.
Wow, that's a very old API there. That's great to see that one still working.
Yeah, it's still working and functioning well. And in MicroProfile, we have provide a way to pass in these rules. We call it MicroProfile JWT. So basically, it add the UPN and also groups over and above JWT token. So when the backend receives a request, you will get a header, authentication header. So if you open up that token, you can find out the backend runtime will be able to find out which group you belong to. If you belong to user or admin, you are allowed to access this one. Otherwise, it will directly say forbidden.
Okay, so that's kind of like I'm able to access the claims in the token that way.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah, great. So, and you can also inject the token, inject the claim to the backend as well. So you can see it. So I mentioned earlier, in Spring, also Spring support JSR 3.30, as that directly the JSR. However, auto-wired is kind of more popular in Spring application. So, however, is when you use MicroProfile, remember to use @inject.
Okay.
So this is a data access. So in this PiggyMetrics, it use MongoDB. As you know, MongoDB is NoSQL, right? Although it's it's currently there's a Jakarta EE spec is called JNoSQL. Is a kind of you are able to you can either use the Java JNoSQL implementation to directly work with the MongoDB, or you can use some other like libraries and etc. In Spring, it has some APIs for you to work with MongoDB.
It looks like there's some common APIs between these two. It looks like they both are using bean validation. Is that right?
Yeah, you are absolutely right. So actually, the Spring Boot also support some of the Jakarta EE specifications. As we mentioned earlier, like a JSR 330 at inject, also the bean validation, and also the servlet. So basically, if you think, okay, you don't need to migrate from JavaX to Jakarta X for the Spring app, actually you are wrong. So you still need to migrate from JavaX to Jakarta if you're using bean validation or servlet APIs.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or the inject.
Let's keep going because I really want to get started. I'm very eager to get going with the coding.
Yeah.
And there is a quick question, if I may. Is it possible to inject dependency by constructor, not by inject in fields?
Yes. CDI support 3 levels injection. One is the kind of the field injection. The other one is the constructor injection, and also the method injection. Yes. You
mean I can still use this at post construct and at pre-destroy annotations?
Yeah, you can use the post construct and pre-destroy as well. Yeah. So that's a really, really great question. Okay, so that's is kind of pretty much for your application. So Ed, is because you are using MicroProfile, we also have provide a really good ecosystem with the cloud infrastructure.
That's really important because I want to be able to use industry standard tools like Grafana and Prometheus and Zipkin and Elk to understand how my application is performing and to be able to do diagnostic and log in analytics.
That's a great thing, great comments, Ed. So with that, when you mention Grafana and Prometheus, and I highly recommend to check out these metrics because this metric produce a format directed to be used by Grafana or Prometheus. And also is there's a lot of some dashboard already on the Grafana for Open Liberty, and some other vendors also has some dashboard provided. It's a great ecosystem. So check it out. It's very easy. You can see here the annotations and etc.
Let's keep going because I really want to get to the code. So maybe we can speed things up.
Yeah. So the next thing is, remember you have these 4 microservices, and then they will be running independently in the cloud. Remember, in order to communicate with the cloud, each microservice should be intelligent. They should be able to communicate its health status with Kubernetes. So with that, I highly recommend to you to use a liveness and readiness annotation to direct to say and what kind of circumstances these microservices still alive.
Wow, that's great.
So it's one example. If you say, okay, I might route RAM properly, so this one has to be down so that Kubernetes can kill it. So the readiness, you can one of the example, if you check the database or check the backend to see whether you can connect to them, to say whether you're ready to serve a request.
Okay, well that really makes a lot of sense. You're basically saying I'm telling the container environment how to tell if I'm healthy or not.
Yes, exactly. Okay. So this make a microservice is very intelligent. So the next thing is you might consider to improve the resilient status of your microservice. As you can see in like the PiggyMetrics the Spring Boot version, they use Hystrix and Ribbon. Have you heard of Hystrix, Ed?
I have, but I thought it might have been going out of service. Is that right?
Yeah, you are absolutely right. So with this, if for the PiggyMetrics, first thing is you need to worry about if there's a kind of CVS, and you need to worry about yourself. You need to fix that kind of the vulnerability yourself.
Yeah, it's very important. I keep a very tight eye on the CVE database.
Yes, exactly. So you need to take care of yourself, because this is go out of the maintenance, is under maintenance, is no active development happening. So good news is you can direct migrate this one to MicroProfile fault tolerance. So in fault tolerance is it has a retry, a circuit breaker, timeout, fallback, and a bulkhead. Basically, is all the functionality offered by Hystrix is provided by MicroProfile fault tolerance. The beauty with this is you only need to call this API. The implementation will need to worry about the CVE and etc.
Right.
Even the Open Liberty, if there's a vulnerability thing found, Open Liberty need to fix ASAP. So this is the kind of beauty of this. You can just need to worry about your own business logic. So next thing is the API. So basically, it's the kind of the in Spring in the Spring Boot you use API gateway. In MicroProfile, there's a MicroProfile Open API. If you said you want to migrate to use Open Liberty has kind of a Swagger UI integration. It's a MicroProfile provider.
Oh, you just said the magic word. All my developers are saying, "Oh, everything has to be in Swagger." So that's going to work for me. Great.
Another tick. Yeah. So for the distributed tracing you mentioned earlier, in Spring you have automatically been done by Spring Cloud Sleuth, and similarly in MicroProfile we have open tracing automatically managed for you, so you don't need to do anything. And this can work with either Jaeger or Zipkin. So we have which one is your favorite?
Well, I tend to go with Zipkin because I have a developer on my team who knows it very well. He just came from another company. We're able to hire people off the street that know Zipkin. It seems everyone knows Zipkin.
Okay, that's great. So this is a guide for this Zipkin, this guide for Jaeger. So you can check it out. So one last thing for the infrastructure. So it's you have in the PiggyMetrics, you heard of this monitor, dashboard, and service discovery. So you can directly migrate them to Grafana or Kubernetes, Zipkin, Jaeger, the ELK, and etc. So this is the make your application really clean.
When I go to sites like Glassdoor.com or Stack Overflow, I see tons of questions being asked and answered on all of these technologies on the right here. So it's really great that my app will be able to take advantage of these things that everyone already knows.
Yeah, absolutely. So you just your developer just concentrate on the business logic. All the others is pretty much standard.
Cool.
Okay. So Ed,
if I can interrupt again, there is a question from Werner this time. What about Micrometer? Can that be directly migrated from Spring Boot to MicroProfile?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's a MicroProfile at the moment is trying to investigate to support Micrometer. So with hopefully next year we can work on that. So with that support, that will be a great story to migrate from Micrometer Spring Boot to MicroProfile micrometer.
Yeah. So another one, have you tried to convert the Spring integration test with Spring Boot test? Do you have any porting tips?
Well, that's a great question. For the testing, in MicroProfile, we recommend some technologies like a mock framework, and also the container testing, like a test containers, and etc.
Oh, wow. So test containers can work too. Okay.
Yeah. So check out the other GitHub repo is being created for testing microservices called microshed testing. Yeah.
Well, that's good to know. With only one sprint to do before we can get this work done, I don't think we'll have time to focus on testing too much, but let me see what we can do.
Okay.
So one sprint later. Okay, I'm back. We built a prototype, and it's just a proof of concept only with showing the different minimum viable product user scenarios. So we got this thing running on Azure Kubernetes Service, and what we did was leverage the built-in discovery from Kubernetes. We have sort of a trick that we've done to do that. You can take a look at our GitHub for that. So let's go on to the next one. In fact, I'd like to give you a little demo. Let's take a look at what it takes to run PiggyMetrics on MicroProfile on the Azure Kubernetes Service. We'll start by looking at the Azure Container Registry that's deployed alongside the Azure Kubernetes Service cluster. The Container Registry, in our case, has 4 different Docker images. Let's take a look at the account service Docker image. And you can see that we have the tag name and a convenient Docker pull command. If we wanted to pull it ourselves, we could copy this to the clipboard and just run it. And let's go back up to the resource group and take a look at the test cluster and look at the workloads. And you can see we've got all of those services and more because we have Grafana and Zipkin and MongoDB. And we have the Kibana running and the Elasticsearch, Prometheus. All of these are different Docker containers. But let's take a look at the ones that we have here. Authorization, statistics, account, and gateway. Those are the ones that comprise our actual app. I'll also mention that though the Azure Spring Cloud Service has the monitoring, you can get the same level of monitoring and information at a higher level for the Azure Kubernetes Service directly here. But this demo is not going to be showing that because I'm showing the use of Zipkin, Grafana, and Kibana for these purposes. Let's look at the command line for the Kubernetes system. We will show first the pods that we have running. We have 2 each for the workloads that comprise the microservice, and then we have our deployment showing the same kind of system that we have actually deployments that are set up. And let's now take a look at the service. And the service gives us the external IPs for the things that we care about. The first one we care about is the app gateway, the application gateway. Let's take a look at PiggyMetrics. So let's log in with our test account here. And we see our income and our expenses. Let's go ahead and create another expense of type $10 a month on transportation, and click Save. We're just putting some data in the system so we can take a look at it in the next phase, which is the Zipkin. So we will run the query and see a few seconds ago we have a put, and let's look through the span. And so we can see that we hit the gateway and then went to the account service and then went to the statistics service. So if we click show, you can see this trace flowing through the system here. It's the JaxRS component using the put operation. And you can see the different URLs that are going through. Let's now look at Grafana, which gives us the performance information. First, we will take a look at the CPU. So you can see the system load being shown here. Another very interesting one for us in this microprofile world is the servlets. So we can see the different instances of the servlets. As Emily mentioned, we have the health checks and the metrics. So there's a lot of services that are running, servlets that are running here to provide the microprofile introspection to do the work that we're demoing. And you can see average response times per request and over the last 10 minutes by the servlets. Finally, we will look at garbage collection. And if we scroll down here, we can see we have not been using the application, then we started using the application and do some more time per garbage collection cycle. Okay. Finally, we will look at Kibana and show our logs. So let's refresh the query. And you can see we have a lot of data that's been over the day that days that we've been interacting with the application. So let's drill down into this particular message here. You can see a new data point. So this is when we put the new expense into the system. And so all of the interactions with the system are logged directly with the ELK system that we have here. Let's go back to the slides and we'll take through it. And we have the GitHub repo. So what we've done is the technologies we've used are the config service, fault tolerance, the Java JSON Web Toolkit. We did the REST client. We did all of the recommendations that you showed us. And I will go to the next slide. And so we've made the side-by-side comparison, kind of showing what was on the Azure Spring Cloud version with Spring Boot, and then the corresponding microprofile technologies. And what happened is we didn't have time to get through the notification service. So we did gateway, account, auth, and statistics, but not the notification service. So let's go to the next slide. And so the takeaway, we really feel like the sort of principle that we're trying to get across is that developers should be free to choose what works for them, right? So enterprises should provide developers with the tools and platforms that they need that enable innovation. So this really fits in very well with the microprofile way or microservices way of doing things. Each microservice can build their stack the way they want to. And both Spring and MicroProfile can provide facilities for developers to build next-generation applications for the cloud. So there are some similarities and differences, but we were really happy to see that it's a lightweight runtime. So let's go up to the next slide. And here's another set of comparisons that we've sort of distilled it down even further. So in the microprofile world, you have a thin WAR, and in the Spring implementation world, you have fat jars or small jars, and they can use the jib plugin for creating containers out of those things. Let's go to the next one, and this is the one that Hilmer was asking about. So the GitHub repo for this translated thing is right here. My colleague Jiang Ma is the one who actually did this, and you can take a look at that. The original PiggyMetrics on Azure Spring Cloud, there's an end-to-end example that really shows how to bring, how to do that whole thing that I showed in 2 minutes at the beginning of the demo. There's a link to Emily's migration guide right there. and I'm sorry, Emily's comparison guide, and then the 2 different starters that we talked about. One of the things that's really great, I'm stepping out of the role here, role play, is to say we're all learning from each other in the Java community. So I will give props to the Spring world for creating, Spring Roo and then eventually Spring Boot, and then creating the concept of a Spring starter and having that idea that it's a simple website you can go to and get your project jump started. And all of that, that's operational excellence that Spring really has brought to the table. But MicroProfile is doing the same thing. There's no monopoly on innovation. And what all of us are about, Spring, Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, Red Hat, all of us are trying to empower developers to do the thing that they need to do, which is create business value for their users. So that's why it's really important to recognize that though we are sort of having friendly competition here, we're all working together on the behalf of developers. So thank you very much. I'll work with Tanya and see if I can get that video published that we had a problem with.
And also, just to squeeze in last question here, what about the future of open tracing in MicroProfile? Open tracing and open census recently merged to form open telemetry. Will open telemetry ultimately replace open tracing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we discussed this MicroProfile open tracing this year, and we are prototyping to adopt open telemetry. In the next year, probably we will do more in Anger. So basically, it's we directed the kind of consume the open telemetry and into MicroProfile. The other thing is because open telemetry has a metrics, also has the open tracing. So we also need to look at the relationships between the MicroProfile metrics with the open telemetry metrics as well. So however, we want to get started to consume the tracing first from the open telemetry. So watch a space. If you want to, please feel free to contribute as well. So it's directly go to log issues and directly chat on the GitHub of the individual MicroProfile specifications.
Okay, so I guess what's left for me to do is to thank you both. I will invite you to look at some pretty nice comments about this session in the chat. I am super thrilled and excited. Well, not just comments about the session, I would say some looks were commented here as well. So Ed and Emily, people love the looks, so keep it up. And yes,
great.
yes. We do expect you next year as well with so much more innovation and involvement from both of you and both of the companies, Microprofile, Microsoft and IBM as well.
I can tell you we have some very exciting things that we'll be announcing shortly.
Okay, we're looking forward to that. Okay. Well, thank you so much, and we will be in touch as always. And Ed will work on making sure the recording is available.
Make sure that video is there.
Okay.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. See you soon. Bye to both.
See you soon. Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.